that kind of brings us to the topic of the episode today, is just discussing, creating game like atmospheres, getting game ready reps, all of those kind of buzzy topics that a lot of coaches speak about, whether it's with limited resources, whether it's indoors, whether it's with limited manpower, and just kind of discussing our experiences plus the conversations that we've been lucky enough to have across a ton of college campuses to be able to create kind of the ideas that stem from, and be able to have that conversation obviously for our listeners, and kind of give them a little bit of our perspective and create a little dialogue around that. So it's always been tricky in this time of year for many college coaches, and I'm sure high school coaches feel the same of, it's cold outside, but we have games in a short amount of time, or practice doesn't start till a certain date, and we only have 2.5 weeks to get those guys ready and prepared, and you're kind of just holding your breath and hoping that guys are preparing on their own time. When you talk about getting game ready reps on the pitching side of things, obviously part of that is for pitchers is what they do over the winter time and making sure they're prepared to handle the workload. But what are some of the core pieces of utilizing that when it comes start time at full team practice?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, just that I learned going through the process and then talking to some of these coaches is like always having a plan, no matter what the plan looks like. And as I've referenced on here a million times, if you've listened before, my former head coach used to a lesson that he taught me that I love. And not everyone likes it. I use this, I reference this lesson a lot in my like everyday life, and people are like, I don't get it, but for some reason it struck with me. But it's like the best part about having a plan is if you have a plan, then you can adjust, because things get thrown in your way, whether it's weather or whatever. Especially in baseball, like if you have to then move your practice or change how it's going. If you have a plan set, then it's easier to adjust from that plan and move forward, and it doesn't send you into complete chaos. Because if you're just flying by the seat of your pants, and then something happens, which it inevitably will, it's really hard to then adjust. So for me, it's like have a plan of some kind, and it's so important. For pitchers, yes, you would like as many game like reps as possible. It would be great if you had 25 innings under everyone's belt by the time you opened up, which is not possible. For me, it's building them up to be able to handle workload, to pitch the necessary innings early in the year and continue to build as you move through the season. So, however you go about building that workload up, then kind of within that structure is when you can start to kind of make it game like. And on the pitching side, you can't always have a hitter in the box. You can't always be seeing what pitches are doing against the barrel. It's just, you have limited time, you have limited resources. The hitters need to be doing other things. You can't just constantly have your arms, be throwing against hitters and beginning those live reads. You have to kind of get a little bit creative. You have to, I think, it's a mindset with your guys, telling them to understand, or having them understand like what's the goal of what we're doing today, whether it's a throwing session even or a bullpen, but especially the bullpen days. Like, what are we working on here? And Jimmy Jackson always talks about like, over the rubber, over the plate. What are their guys' bullpens, what are they working on that day? Are they working mechanically, or are they working on pitch shape? And a lot of times when you get to this point in the season, when you're talking about getting ready to play games, it's a lot of over the plate stuff, right? It's like, you know, are we commanding certain pitches? Where are we commanding it? And then, that's why I think, things like charting become huge, and then competitions within those bullpens. And there's several different ways to compete within those bullpens. I'll never forget one of my, Arizona does a really good job with this. John DeRoyan, just their competitions, being able to bring energy and juice to their bullpen sessions, and different games that you can do within that is really important. But for me, it like starts with, you have to start with a plan. What do you want your guys to look like? How are you going to build them up? A schedule so that you can adjust. And then it's about who do you need to, build up and extend the most, kind of have an idea of guys' roles, and then competing within kind of that structure is the easiest way to do it. But that's interesting because like all of these things are kind of, there's a million different ways to get to that scenario, that you can take. It's just really kind of your preference and what you're comfortable with.
My question for you, as we go on the pitching side, and we'll spin this conversation around, and I'll do the hitting side a little bit later, and let you ask some of the questions. But my question for you is, how do you almost build up that mindset of those guys to turn on the compete element of even in those practice settings of getting them to understand that this is like supposed to be competitive, or turning off the mechanical side of the brain and turning on the execution side of the brain, like the over the plate that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier said than done, obviously. And sometimes, and maybe this was just showed like a lack of my ability as a pitching coach, but there were times where I wish I could just like flick on a hack attack and dial that sucker up, because like that's game like on the hitting side, right? And it's like you don't have that on the pitching side. So how do you adjust that mindset? You're not going to be. I wasn't successful with all 20 plus pitchers, obviously, and it was a constant battle. But I think it's just like reinforcement. Constantly, reinforcing that point, verbally. I'm someone who I love having conversations. I love communicating. That's why I sit here and do this all the time. So I like to always kind of just constantly telling them that's what it was, teaching them that structure, and then you know setting them up to fail almost in bullpen sessions, for me, because sometimes it's not always like there was great learning lessons in those times, especially if you had guys who did want to always tinker with mechanics. If you set up a bullpen session that had parameters or goals within it, we're trying to hit, I don't even know if I ever did this, but like let's say we're trying to hit 7 glove side fastballs for strikes. Just a completely random thing I pulled. If they're worried about their mechanics and they're failing at that, and they start off 0 for 4, take them off the mound, like things like that. And then like obviously there's going to be some frustration built in there, and if I could, depending on the structure of how quickly I had to move through bullpens, you bring them back and let them finish. But like things like that, where sometimes there is like, okay, this is a learning lesson for you. Like I was completely, I was on you that entire bullpen because you weren't accomplishing what we needed you to accomplish. This is your equivalent of failing on the mound. And every guy is different. So you have to know how your guys react. Some guys you could really do that with, and some guys you couldn't, right? Because they're completely hard on themselves from pitch one. And it's like, I'm not even going to say anything to you. You didn't succeed today. You understand that. I don't need to tell you that. But kind of for me, if I could set parameters and have a challenge, and like, here's our goal for today, and, let them fail. Try not to step in when they are having a bad session, or try not to, because that's going to happen and we need you, right? Like, everyone looks good in preseason in their bullpens when there's no hitter, right? Because like stuff looks good, velocity can be there. A lot of times they're fresh. They'll be around the zone for the most part. Your at least usable guys. Even then, when you move into any live scenarios, like there's no fielders, there's no nothing. You look good. You look good enough, right? As long as you're around the zone. You really figure out what your guys are going to be able to do and how good they are when a guy boots a ball when the season starts and there's traffic on base and you walk a guy and you got to hold a runner now. So I think trying to set up scenarios, and we talked to, I probably didn't do the best job at this, but, talking to some of the coaches that we have of that do this, of putting them in positions where they can fail, and letting them fail, and, trying to get them to work through that, is just extremely important. And that's the best way to go about it. And from the pitching standpoint, like you're never going to get fully there, right? You're never going to really simulate game like reps until you're out there. Especially because like, even if you are doing some sort of live AB situation, unfortunately you have to be inside, there's no defense back there. You don't know what the outcome is until it's game day. And you need guys to be able to be fearless in the strike zone, and be able to, pitch within the zone, compete. And when things start to go haywire, you need to kind of have guys that are able to work through those innings and limit damage best they can. So kind of setting up things in their bullpen, and making sure that there are ways that, you can have them struggle really hard, parameters. I don't know, throw 3 sliders and put it into this small box, even your best guys. Like, okay, you didn't do it. You went 1 for 3. That's 33%. That's not good enough. How do you adjust? How do you fix it? Get back in there, do it again. That was even one of the most simple ones, is when they would throw a bad pitch, throw it again. Because a lot of times guys want to move off of that when they can't get it 2-3 times in a row. Keep making them throw it until they hit it.